Hi, my name is Brandon Keller. I'm 34 years old, and 3 months ago I thought I'd cracked the code to happiness. Sell the house near Seattle, pocket the equity, fly south, and wake up every morning to trade commodities with the Pacific glittering outside my window. Easy. My wife Helena, emergency room dynamo, fearlessly compassionate, occasionally reckless, was just as hungry for change. We pictured ourselves clinking pineapple cocktails at sunset, laughing at how stressed we used to be. Turns out, paradise can hide its fine print in the palm trees. Helena and I landed on Harper Isles late on a steamy Thursday. The airport was one building, 2 surfboards as decoration, and one ancient baggage carousel that coughed up suitcases like it hated them. We signed the condo papers the very next morning, standing barefoot on a balcony that overlooked Quincy Bay. The realtor promised gentle trade winds and neighbors so friendly they'll feel like family. That sounded perfect. After years of gray drizzle and tech startup tension, I craved community almost as much as sunshine. Before I dive into how things unraveled, quick favor: if you've ever ditched the grind for someplace warmer, or if you dream about it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how many of us are plotting the same escape. And let me know what would be on your must-bring list. I forgot my decent chef's knife and regretted it at every barbecue. Those first 8 weeks blurred into a slideshow of bliss. I rose at 4:30 each morning to track the London grain markets while the palms outside our bedroom window still rustled in darkness. By the time Helena left for the hospital at 6:30, I'd usually banked enough to take the afternoon off. She worked 3 10-hour shifts, Monday through Wednesday, so Thursday became our unofficial weekend kickoff. We hike the lava bluffs, snorkel over coral gardens, then collapse into hammocks with thick paperback novels neither of us finished. Evenings were when the condo complex came to life. One Friday, the bulletin board advertised, "Pauhana by the pool, 600. Bring something tasty, leave your troubles at the gate." I grabbed 2 bottles of Pinot Grigio. Helena assembled mango salsa that looked like confetti. We walked into a scene out of an expat magazine spread. String lights flickering over teak loungers, steel drum rhythms leaking from a Bluetooth speaker, and clusters of residents arranged by nothing more than curiosity. That party is where we met the triad who would change everything: Clarence and Leela, retirees from Oakland who spoke in tandem; Bob and Ramona Platt, Texans whose spirits were about 60% bourbon; and finally Baxter Reynolds with his partner Cara Davenport. Baxter introduced himself like this: "Baxter, but please call me Bax. I'm a psyche expansion guide. Think of me as a personal trainer for the subconscious." He said it smoothly, as though the phrase had impressed people before. Cara, poised and elegant, worked as a regional vice president for a California bank, which explained the diamond the size of a gumdrop on her finger. Baxter was movie star handsome, tawny skin, loose chestnut curls, a smile that switched on like stage lighting. While I poured wine, he zeroed in on Helena. He asked about her ER stories, tisk-tisked hospital bureaucracy, then told her she had photon-bright empathetic energy. Helena, who can handle a chainsaw accident without flinching, actually blushed. I chalked it up to cocktail chatter and reminded myself to loosen up. Everybody here was charming, that was half the draw. Still, little things prick you before you realize you're bleeding. 20 minutes after meeting Baxter, I noticed he'd introduced me to Cara but never once asked what I did. When I tried to join the conversation, something about decompression sickness on dive calls, he pivoted his body so his broad shoulders walled me off. Subtle but unmistakable. I let it slide. Vacation mode, Brandon, vacation mode. Helena's side of the social Venn diagram expanded faster than mine. She grabbed lunch with Leela, started morning jogs with Ramona, and signed us up for an island cleanup project, which meant picking cigarette butts out of sand while locals honked appreciation from mopeds. I enjoyed most of it, though my introvert battery drained faster than hers. By week 4, I noticed she used the word "we" less when describing our plans and I more when describing hers. One Saturday, she burst into the condo waving a flyer. "Baxter's offering a complimentary scuba cert class," she said, eyes shining. "Boat time included. Think of the turtles, Brandon." I reminded her that my sinuses protested if I descended faster than an elevator at a mall, but she wasn't deterred. "You do the shallow stuff, I'll explore the drop-offs." Her excitement was cute. My hesitation felt like wet sand on fireworks. I agreed to audit the pool session and see how my ears behaved. Pool day was when Baxter's full charisma hit me like humid air after an air-conditioned cab ride. He arrived in a fitted rash guard, tousled hair that looked styled by the tide itself. The class of 8 ringed him like kids around a campfire. He demonstrated mask clearing, then explained buoyancy control with metaphors about emotional ballast. People laughed. Helena floated beside him, her smile unguarded, the way she used to smile at me when we were newly dating. There's a moment every spouse fears. The second you realize your partner is checking someone else's signals. It's not about sex yet, just attention. But attention is the currency of intimacy, and I could feel my balance dropping. I tried to inject humor. If I attempt that somersault entry, someone better livestream it for the insurance company. A couple of students chuckled. Baxter just gave me a polite nod before continuing his monologue about unlocking fluid states of being. After class, he pulled Helena aside. I pretended to fuss with fins while my peripheral vision zoomed in. Their conversation was hushed, punctuated by Helena's quick, conspiratorial laughter. At one point, he touched her elbow, not a sleazy grab, just a fingertip punctuation mark, but my stomach flipped anyway. Old jealousy, I told myself, the same jitter that passed whenever a doctor flirted with her during residency mixers. Breathe. On the drive home, Helena vibrated with enthusiasm. Bax thinks my breathing cadence is already near freediver levels. He wants to pair up for the first open water dive Tuesday morning. You okay hanging back at the condo if your ears aren't better? Warm wind whipped through her hair and she looked more alive than I'd seen in years. I forced a smile. Of course, I'll trade soy futures and cheer you on. She squeezed my thigh, grateful, oblivious to the hammering in my chest. Reflection break, ever felt proud and threatened at the same time. Drop me a line, how did you handle it? That night lying under a ceiling fan that ticked like a slow metronome, I mulled the biggest lesson I'd learned growing up in a volatile household. React in anger and you feed the fire. Observe in silence and you learn where the sparks land. So I observed. Helena's phone pinged more often, usually a short burst of messages followed by her glowing expression. She changed her screen lock code, not incriminating by itself, but different. I noted it, filed it, didn't accuse. Tuesday arrived. At dawn, Helena kissed me goodbye, tasting like toothpaste and coconut lip balm. I waved from the balcony as she climbed into Baxter's vintage Jeep, her dive gear rattling in the back. She looked weightless, as though island air had siphoned off every burden she'd carried stateside. Part of me was happy for her. Another part felt like I'd just watched my investment walk away with a better offer. I battled the Chicago Board of Trade for 6 hours, snagged a tidy profit, then paced the tile floor counting waves until she returned. She tracked sand across the entryway, eyes shining. I saw a manta ray the size of a Volkswagen, Brandon. We hovered above a reef ledge at 70 feet while it barrel rolled under us. I've never felt so present. She twirled her ponytail like a teenager. A salty kiss on my cheek, then off to the shower, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Presence, that was Baxter's word, not mine. The next evening, Kara hosted a small wine and cheese on their balcony. I hoped seeing Baxter in his own domestic habitat, in full view of his wife, would soothe my nerves. Helena and I arrived fashionably 5 minutes late. The spread looked Pinterest perfect. Reclaimed wood board piled with papaya wedges, Stilton, and something called dragon fruit salami. Kara poured a deep risée and asked about our move, genuinely kind. Baxter, however, hovered near Helena like an orbiting moon. He teased her about equalizing pressure too quickly, placed a hand on the small of her back when guiding her to the buffet. I counted 3 touches in 30 minutes. I hadn't touched her once because the arrangement of people made leaning in awkward. Halfway through the night, Clarence sidled up beside me. His deep baritone was quiet enough to mask the words from the group. Baxter's a magnetic fellow, isn't he? I offered a noncommittal shrug. Clarence's eyes, dark and steady, stayed on mine. He magnetizes everything made of iron, Brandon. You might want to keep something non-metallic in Helena's pocket. A cryptic joke, maybe, but my pulse ticked up. Later, walking home under a sky scattered with more stars than Seattle sees in a decade, Helena raved about Baxter's theory that fear and desire share the same neurochemical doorway. He says you can walk through either side, choose joy over anxiety. I said nothing for a full block, listening to our flip-flops scrape pavement. Finally, I asked, did fear and desire feel the same when he had his hand on your back? It slipped out colder than I meant. She stopped beneath a street lamp, eyes narrowed. Brandon, you're not jealous already, are you? We moved here to evolve, not to drag old insecurities along. She kissed my cheek, a peace offering and a warning in one motion, then walked ahead, leaving me to trail her shadow the rest of the way. Jealous, yes, but more than that, alert. I'd learned through market crashes that overreaction ruins good positions, disciplined patience reaps reward. So I logged every interaction into mental ledgers the way I logged soy inventories, date, time, emotional volatility index. And I promised myself, if line items started spelling a pattern I couldn't ignore, I'd act. For now, I breathed. The island exhaled with me, palm fronds shushing like they knew secrets. By week 8, small fractures widened. Helena skipped Thursday beach hikes to attend Baxter's breathwork circles. She installed a meditation app that chimed every hour, even during dinner. When I teased that enlightenment could wait until dessert, she frowned like I'd belched in church. One night she came home and announced that monogamy is a social script, not a biological imperative. She laughed right after, called it an interesting discussion prompt, but her eyes searched mine for reaction. I told her intellectual curiosity was healthy, then excused myself to catch the Asian grain market open. Inside my office, I shut the door and practiced the breathing technique the anger management counselor back at Swedish Hospital had drilled into me years earlier. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. It works, by the way, if you ever feel your pulse hammer your temples. Round this time, the first real warning arrived, and it came from the last person I expected, a lanky professional surfer named Colt Wheeler, whom everyone called Skinny. Skinny had chatted with Helena at the initial pool party, harmless flirtation I dismissed. One Sunday, he spotted me jogging along Quincy Promenade and flagged me down. He spoke in the easy cadence of someone who'd spent more hours talking to waves than people, but his message was sharp. Bro, I'm not sticking my nose in your sandcastle, but Bax wrecked my sister's marriage last year. Same pattern, private coaching sessions, mind-body workshops, telling her she was a butterfly trapped in a jar. Next thing we know, her jar is at his place and her husband's drinking alone. Skinny spat into the shrubs. Just watch your 6. I thanked him, shook his sun-bleached hand, jogged off. 5 steps later, I stopped, pretending to retie my shoelace while my thoughts tangled. Maybe Skinny had an axe to grind. Maybe not. Either way, I'd just received outside confirmation that Baxter's magnetism could cut flesh if mishandled. That afternoon, Helena found me on the balcony studying soybean trend lines. You okay? You look stormy. I gave her a measured smile. Just market noise. She kissed my temple. Maybe Baxter can teach you to surf those waves instead of fight them, she said, half joking. I let the comment float off into the humid air because I hadn't parsed whether it was critique or invitation. Here's the takeaway I remind myself even now. Love forgives blind spots, but respect demands clear sight. At this stage, I still loved Helena fiercely, but respecting her meant acknowledging the distance she was putting between us, and respecting myself meant not pretending it wasn't happening. I had a choice. Confront her and risk accelerating whatever momentum Baxter had, or gather more data until I could act decisively. Anyone else been stuck between calling out a red flag and waiting for proof? Tell me how you balanced patience with self-respect. Maybe your story will help someone who's watching right now. As the horizon caught fire in its nightly slideshow of pinks and apricots, Helena curled against me in the hammock and whispered that she'd never been happier. Wind braided her hair across my shoulder. I traced constellations and wondered how long happiness could hover before gravity claimed it. In my peripheral vision, lights flickered on in Baxter's unit across the courtyard. Silhouettes moved past the sliding glass doors. His, maybe Kara's, maybe someone else. The island offered no answers, just another warm breeze scented with plumeria and possibility. And somewhere beyond the reef, sharks circled unseen, teaching the same unchanging lesson. Paradise is beautiful, but its teeth are always sharp. The morning after Skinny's off-the-cuff warning, I woke with salt on my tongue and a low throb behind my eyes. Helena was already up, humming in the kitchen while our single-serve espresso gagged out sludge. From the lanai, I could see the charter docks where Baxter's boat, painted a smug, gleaming pearl, bobbed like it owned the tide. Big day, Helena chirped, sliding a mug toward me. She wore a new dive skin, cobalt panels tracing her curves. Bax says the current's perfect for drift practice. I cleared my throat, hunting for a neutral tone. Thought you two finished the deep stuff yesterday. That was checkout dive 3, she said, ponytail swishing. Today we tackle buoyancy meditation at 40 feet. She winked as if the phrase made perfect sense. Here, where I should have laid a boundary, right? Instead, I clinked cups and asked whether she'd packed the spare O-rings. Lesson 1 for anyone in a relationship. Silence can feel supportive in the moment, but it often signs away leverage you'll desperately want later. By 9:30, the sun was a welding torch in the sky. We drove to Harbor Point listening to Island Pop. Helena drummed the steering wheel. I massaged my temples, every bass hit echoing Skinny's words, wrecked my sister's marriage. I told myself I mention it after the dive once I'd cooled down. Spoiler, delaying hard conversations rarely makes them easier. Baxter lounged on the dock like a catalog model, rash guard clinging to muscles that looked airbrushed. He greeted Helena with the European double-cheek kiss, light, practiced, too familiar for my taste. When he turned to me, I forced a grin and extended a hand. Thanks for looking after her ears. He squeezed just firmly enough to show power. Happy to. A shared dive expands trust better than any couple's retreat. Maybe you'll join us next time, Brandon. I shrugged, pretending my left ear didn't crackle whenever I swallowed. Maybe. Helena hopped aboard, chatting about manta migration patterns. I stayed on the dock, arms crossed. She raised 2 fingers in a tiny wave as the yacht eased out. For 20 seconds, I watched the wake widen, then turned and headed straight for the ENT clinic. Dr. Mahmoud was brisk. Otoscope, tilt, click, sigh. Eustachian tube dysfunction, you push deeper, you risk a perforation. Translation, no scuba for at least 6 weeks. He printed a note, patted my shoulder, and suggested snorkel therapy. Walking back to the Jeep, I rehearsed how to share the news. If Helena's dive buddy were anyone but Baxter, it wouldn't sting so much. I tried reframing. She deserved the ocean. I could cheer from the surface. Still, the word buddy felt like sand in my molars. Quick reflection for anyone listening. Have you ever felt left behind by a partner's new passion? How did you keep connection alive without clipping their wings? Helena burst through the condo door near dusk, cheeks sunburned to petal pink. We glided over a turtle cleaning station, Bran. Baxter coached me to slow my inhale until my bubbles rose like silver coins. She mimed the motion, eyes glittering. I offered my best smile. Sounds incredible, wish I'd been there. She noticed the envelope in my hand. What's that? Doctor's orders. No diveys below 10 feet for a while. Her face fell, sympathy flickering into disappointment so fast I almost missed it. Oh, well, snorkeling together will still be fun. Of course, I said, but we both knew snorkeling was the kiddie pool compared to hover meditating with Neptune's life coach. That night I grilled Mahi while she texted. Phone angled away, she thumb-typed, paused for a giggle, typed again. I seasoned fish with too much salt. When dinner was done, she picked at it, scrolling between bites. Conversation flared, sputtered, died. I asked about the drift dive. She answered in bullet points, saving the richer details for whoever lived behind that glowing screen. After dishes, I tried initiating the talk I'd postponed. Hell, can we set some guardrails? I'm all for you exploring, but I need to feel plugged in, not benched. She leaned against the counter, arms looped around her waist. Brandon, you are plugged in. You're my husband. This is just growth work. Growth usually includes both spouses. She sighed the way ER nurses sigh when a patient refuses antibiotics. It's only a few sessions. Bax thinks I'm close to a breakthrough on my abandonment schema. Did he diagnose that between fin kicks? Her eyes hardened. Jealousy isn't a good look on you. The words hung like humidity. Then she kissed my cheek, whispered, love you, and disappeared into the bedroom. The lock clicked. I slept on the balcony hammock, listening to tree frogs codify the distance between us. Over the next 2 weeks, patterns emerged as predictably as market candles. Mondays through Wednesdays, Helena worked the ER and collapsed early. Thursdays, Baxter appeared, sometimes jogging the promenade, sometimes knocking with laminated diagrams of somatic flow. They'd vanish until sundown, return laughing at jokes I hadn't heard, smelling of seawater and something faintly floral. I tried occupying myself with sunrise bike rides and ruthless trading. Corn futures spiked on a Midwest drought. My account ballooned. Normally, I'd celebrate with Helena, maybe splurge on a chef's tasting menu. Instead, I screenshotted the profit, stared at it, felt nothing. Clarence noticed. One evening, he cornered me beside the mailboxes. Son, I taught behavioral economics 3 decades. Incentives shape actions. What's Helena's incentive to stay tethered if all the novelty's offshore? I winced. You're saying I should make myself novel again. More like remind her where the shared story started, he said, voice gentler, before someone else rewrites the ending. Wise, but my skill set favored numbers over romance. Still, I tried. Friday, I booked a sunset cruise, just the 2 of us, complete with live slack key guitar. Helena thanked me, yet checked her calendar first. Baxter runs a night dive on Fridays, but maybe I can skip. She said maybe twice, like she needed to believe it. She did skip, to her credit. The cruise was beautiful, molten clouds, dolphins breaching. We toasted passion fruit fizz and joked about tourists mispronouncing Hawaiian street names. For an hour, we felt like us again. Then she mentioned Baxter's theory that fear memories lodge in the diaphragm, and the air shifted. I changed the subject so clumsily the guitarist raised an eyebrow. Here's lesson 2, and I learned it the hard way. A relationship can drown in perfectly pleasant moments if an undertow of resentment goes unspoken. The crisis pivot came from Skinny. He texted me a single line, "Got proof you'll want." Jaybird Cafe, 4 p.m. I arrived to find him hunched over an iced Kona brew, phone in hand. No preamble, he slid it across the table. Video. Grainy but clear, Helena climbing Baxter's villa steps at night, gear bag slung over her shoulder, Baxter behind her, palm flat on her lower back. Timestamp, 2 nights ago, 11:19 p.m., my throat dried. I surf break behind his place, Skinny said. Cameras to catch bored thieves, didn't realize it caught that until I scrubbed footage. He scratched the back of his sun-bleached head. Look, man, maybe it's innocent, but my gut says otherwise. Adrenaline flooded my limbs, cold and electric. I watched the clip again, Helena pausing at the door, Baxter leaning in to whisper something, her half-smile. Innocent? Maybe, but innocence shouldn't need shadows to exist. I thanked Skinny, transferred the video to my phone, then drove home in a fog thicker than island rain. I replayed the footage in the parking lot, knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. Lugging that bag, Helena looked determined, not seduced. Determination scared me more. It meant she'd chosen whatever awaited inside. Inside the condo, she was showering. Steam curled under the bathroom door. I sat on the bed, phone heavy in my hand, debating ambush versus calm inquiry. The door opened, she stepped out wrapped in a towel, and her smile wilted at my expression. What's wrong? I saw a video of you at Baxter's place. My voice was flat, unfamiliar. Her towel knotted tighter. I went for breath analysis. Nighttime visits remove daytime distractions. That why you needed a full gear bag? She hesitated half a click too long. We practiced dry land finning. The phrase was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Instead, I inhaled slowly, nostrils flaring. Tell me straight, are you sleeping with him? She met my stare, eyes glistening. Brandon's sex is the smallest part of true intimacy, Baxter's teachings. Answer the question. She looked past me as though the ceiling fan held the script. Touch can be healing, nothing sordid. That was all I needed to hear, evasion louder than confession. Something in me iced over. Get dressed, I said. We're going for a drive. We headed north along the coastal highway, engine ticking in tense silence. She asked where we were going. I said I needed air. In truth, I was stalling, buying time to choose fury or strategy. On a shoulder overlooking Broad Isle Reef, I pulled over. Waves battered black lava 20 feet below. If you believe I'm the obstacle to your enlightenment, I said, say it now. Her voice quivered. You're not an obstacle, you're my anchor, but anchors can feel heavy when you're learning to float. I stared at the horizon, where ocean met sky in a razor line. Anchors also keep boats from smashing into rocks. She reached for my hand. I let her hold it without squeezing back. Come to a session, she whispered. See how harmless it is. Will Baxter allow that? He encourages transparency. The invitation sounded rehearsed, too neat, yet agreeing would grant me proximity data, and after Skinny's footage, I needed hard evidence more than righteous speeches. Fine, I said. Schedule it. She exhaled relief, maybe believing the storm had passed, but inside me clouds churned. 3 days later, we entered Baxter's studio. Bamboo floors, linen curtains, diffuser misting ilang-ilang. Kara greeted us, serene but distant, like a hostess disengaged from her own party. She led Helena to a mat circle where 5 other women lay with eye pillows. Baxter emerged in white linen, barefoot. He welcomed me, gestured to a side bench. Observer energy only, please. Your presence is support enough. For 80 minutes, he guided the women through breath patterns, long inhales, staccato exhales, layered with language about opening pelvic vortexes. I watched his hands hover inches above Helena's ribcage, tracing invisible shapes. He never groped, technically, but the intimacy radiated. The other husbands, if they existed, were conspicuously absent. Afterward, he offered kombucha. I declined. Helena glowed, pupils large, face slack with post-session euphoria. On the drive home, she said, see, nothing sinister. I responded with the calm of a trader plotting a short squeeze. He's skilled, I'll admit, but professional boundaries are meant for a reason. She turned to the window. You want me to stay small so you feel big? The sentence stung because a sliver of me wondered if it held truth. Sleepless that night, I rewatched Skinny's video and cross-checked recent bank statements. Helena had withdrawn 200 cash on the night of that visit. She rarely carried cash. In my head, I fit puzzle pieces: late-night gear bag, cash, linen floor, a narrative formed, ugly yet coherent. By dawn, I'd sketched a timeline, motives, contingencies. Markets taught me this: if you can't control a variable, hedge against it. I couldn't control Helena's choices, but I could limit Baxter's reach. That meant gathering leverage, financial, emotional, maybe physical. I wasn't sure yet. I only knew passive observation had expired. Before sunrise, I jogged to the breakwater where Skinny waxed his board. "You still have that shark attractant you were testing?" I asked, breath fogging. He nodded slowly, suspicion blinking across his face. "Why?" "Science project," I said. "Need half a bottle." He studied me, then shrugged. "It's nasty stuff. Keep it sealed. Freaks out the reef life." He handed over a small vial the color of rust. As I tucked it into my pocket, I thought about Clarence's incentive lecture. What incentive could compete with the thrill Baxter fed Helena? Fear, perhaps, or grief. But those poisons might corrode the host as quickly as the target. A better incentive, I decided, was absence. Remove the source, the symptom fades. Markets prune inefficiencies, ecosystems cull invasive species. Baxter had become invasive. Walking back along the seawall, I framed the decision like a trade. Risk versus reward. Risk, legal, moral, mortal. Reward, the chance to reclaim my marriage or, at minimum, my dignity. Numbers blurred behind the calculus of anger. Here, where I'll pause for all of you listening. When does justifiable self-defense cross into premeditated harm? Share a moment you caught yourself at that edge. What pulled you back or pushed you forward? I tossed the question into the roar of the surf, but the waves kept their counsel. Behind me, the first tour boats revved engines, eager to ferry honeymooners toward reefs teeming with life and predators that rarely miss an opportunity. In that instant, an idea crystallized, darker than any scenario I dared contemplate. I walked home with a steady stride, knowing that the next line I drew in the sand would not wash away with the tide. Helena called it a graduation. She dropped the word over breakfast on a Wednesday, buttering toast with the kind of careful precision she usually saved for suturing trauma lacerations. "Bax says I'm ready for the final immersion. 7 days, no outside contact, full reset." She looked up, waiting for my blessing. A sliver of papaya slid from my fork back onto the plate. 7 straight nights at his villa. My voice sounded calm, probably because my pulse had slammed the panic button so hard it broke. "It's more like a retreat center," she said, eyes flicking away. "Kara's traveling, so all the guest suites are empty. This is my chance to break the fear loop once and for all." Break the fear loop? Baxter's phrase, not hers. I wiped mango fibers from my thumb and managed a nod that felt stapled to my face. "When do you start?" "Friday. I'll pack tomorrow after shift." She pushed back from the table and kissed my forehead. "Trust the process, Bran. I love you for letting me grow." I watched her ponytail vanish down the hall and realized the house was already too quiet. Lesson break, because someone out there might need it. When a partner's journey demands your silence, do you comply for love or speak for survival? Think about that while I rewind 48 hours to explain how my compliance calcified into something else entirely. 2 days earlier, I'd met our attorney, Gerald Cruz, in a cafe thick with the scent of over-roasted beans. Gerald specialized in what he called soft landings after hard crashes. I gave him the barest outline: unexpected separation, potential infidelity, significant shared assets, and asked him to draft dissolution papers. As he clicked away on his tablet, I felt detached, like I was ordering a service I might cancel before shipping. "What outcome do you want most?" he asked. I pictured Helena's smile back when she still thought sarcasm was an aphrodisiac. "Peace," I said. Then, hearing the hollowness of it, I added, "and fairness." Gerald's eyebrows knit. "Fairness is the foggiest currency, Brandon. Define it before negotiations start." Fairness, the word rattled in my skull that night as Helena slept beside me, face relaxed by dreams in which I probably didn't appear. Fairness to me suddenly looked like a world in which Baxter no longer existed to warp Helena's compass. The math was simple: subtract one predator, rescue one marriage, or at least salvage what remained of my self-respect. Thursday afternoon, with the retreat looming, I asked Helena to join me for a beach walk. She agreed, barefoot in hot sand, gulls strafing overhead. "You'll call once a day?" I tried, though the answer was obvious. "No phones allowed," she said softly. Digital detox is part of the cleanse. A cleanse, right. I shielded my eyes, scanning the horizon where fishing boats sketched crooked lines. Something cold settled behind my breastbone, heavier than jealousy, lighter than grief. Resolve, maybe. That evening I texted Baxter from a number he'd never seen, my work phone used only for two-factor authentication. Ear, finally recovered. Need last checkout dive. Private lesson, Friday 1500 Harbor Point. Confidential, don't distract Helena. He responded within minutes, absolutely. I admire your initiative, our secret. I locked the phone, exhaled, and set the first domino upright. Friday dawned in ultraviolet colors. Sky molten lavender, see a sheet of hammered copper. Helena left for the hospital with her retreat bag stacked by the door, toothbrush still drying on top. I hugged her long enough to memorize the cadence of her heart, then waved until the Jeep's taillights winked out. From a closet safe, I removed the vial Skinny had given me, shark attractant distilled from fish enzymes and something he wouldn't name. Even sealed, it smelled like a dock at low tide. I slid it into a dry bag pouch along with extra weights, nitrile gloves, and bolt cutters. Then I zipped the pouch into a cheap floral duffel, souvenir stand quality, bought for anonymity. The rest of the morning I traded futures like an automaton, closing positions to create an alibi trail. Every few minutes I checked the clock, counting backward from 3. At 1:30 I shut down the workstation and drove toward Harbor Point, windows down, breeze thick with plumeria. My heart beat slow, almost bored, a rhythm I recognized from high-volatility market days. Focus so intense emotion had no room to distort it. Baxter waited at slip 12, sprawled on the transom of a sleek 40-foot catamaran named Aperture. He wore a white rash guard that matched the hull, gold dive computer gleaming. "Captain's running errands," he said, gesturing me aboard. "We'll motor out, anchor, run skills, back in 2 hours tops." I hid my distaste behind a grin. "Perfect. Ears at 80%, so I'll descend slow." "Safety first," he said like a mantra. Below deck he offered kombucha. I declined, claiming a pre-dive fast. Truth, I didn't want my fingerprints on anything but pre-selected surfaces. While he prepped gear, I slid on gloves and rigged a spare BCD to appear novice. Tank half full, weight belt slightly light. Baxter double-checked my gauge like a diligent instructor. "Don't want sudden buoyancy issues at depth, friend." "No worries," I said, picturing him sinking, not floating. We motored 9 miles south, past tourist boats and reef snorkel pontoons. Baxter cut the engines off Quincy Bay's outer shelf where the bottom fell from 60 to 100 feet in a cliff of electric blue void. "Visibility's insane today," he called over the wind. He tossed anchor, tested tension. "Ready." I feigned ear equalization drills while he suited up. When his back was turned, I retrieved the attractant vial, cracked the seal, and drizzled its rust-colored syrup over a soft ball-sized protein chum puck, one of Skinny's experimental baits. I wrapped the puck in mesh, clipped it to a carabiner, and tucked it inside my BCD pocket. The smell slapped me through the gloves. I nearly gagged. "Everything okay?" Baxter asked, mask perched on his forehead. "Just nerves," I said, clicking my snorkel in place. "Haven't been this deep since Oahu last year." He flashed a comforting smile, the same one that probably disarmed half his clientele, and rolled backward into the sea. I followed, splashing down beside him. Water closed over my ears, muffling the world to heartbeat and bubbles. We descended the anchor line in a choreography of slow equalizations. At 15 feet, my left eardrum pinched, real pain but manageable. Baxter checked on me, thumb and forefinger okay. I matched it. We continued. At 30 feet, he signaled to leave the line and drift toward the coral wall. Fish darted through crevices, parrotfish scribbling the reef in neon strokes. At 40 feet, I unclipped the mesh bag, wedged it under a ledge, and palmed the carabiner back onto my belt. The attractant began to ooze, amber tendrils dissolving into cobalt. Baxter glided ahead, unseeing. My plan, stay with him 10 minutes, then mime sinus squeeze ascend. Once he was alone near the bait, nature would handle the rest. Sharks patrol these drop-offs like sentries, oceanic blacktips, maybe even the odd tiger. Skinny swore the formula halved their reaction time. I believed him. We leveled at 50 feet. Baxter motioned me through regulator removal drills. I obeyed, jaw clenched. 2 minutes passed. 3, nothing but curious triggerfish. I fought impatience. Predators sense slack vibes, Skinny said. Give it time. At 6th minute marks, my dive computer blinking, Baxter gestured upward, my share of the skills done. I theatrically pinched my nose, signaled problem. He nodded, guiding me back toward the anchor line. As we kicked, I glimpsed movement below, a sinuous gray shape slipping from shadowed blue into lighter water. Heart surged. I kept my stroke steady. 20 feet from the line, another shape veered in, then a third, each tracing lazy arcs like cursive signatures. Baxter paused, curious, then froze as one silhouette rolled belly up and accelerated. Even muffled, I heard him shout through his reg, a pulpy burst of bubbles. He turned to me, eyes wide behind his mask, gesturing shark. Up, up. I shook my head, pantomiming ear pain, and pointed to the line. He powered ahead, but the nearest shark intercepted, slicing a figure eight. Baxter jerked back, fins churning. The chum's scent must have reached frenzy threshold because the second shark shot upward, jaws open, bumping Baxter's thigh. His kicked mask flooded. He ripped it off, panic spraying bubbles. I rose slowly, hand brushing the anchor rope, staying just below 15 feet where my safety stop would appear legitimate to any later dive computer scrutiny. Baxter writhed 20 yards away. A dull thud reverberated through water, shark ramming tank or flesh, unclear. Then crimson ribbons blossomed, swirling like silk scarves in zero-G. He thrashed, tried to kick, but fins vanished beneath poolsing gray bodies. Adrenaline blurred edges of reality. All I felt was cold efficiency. My computer beeped 3 minutes. I surfaced, hauled onto the swim platform, ditched fins, then hoisted the ladder and bungeed it flat. Below, turbulence rocked the hull. I stripped gloves, tossed them overboard, followed with the duffel and protein wrapper. Evidence sinking into oblivion. Minutes dragged, the water settled. No sign of Baxter, no stray limb, only a diffuse cloud slowly thinning. I sat on the transom, legs trembling, counting breaths. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. The same anger management exercise that once saved me from bar fights. It saved me again now from screaming. When the water finally cleared to a pale bruise, I lowered the ladder, clipped on a tow line, and swam a slow spiral to collect stray gear pieces. Found nothing. Back aboard, I rinsed goggles, pulled anchor, set the catamaran on autopilot toward the docks. Halfway in, I remembered to smear sunblock across my neck. No sense arriving pale after an afternoon training session. Just outside the harbor mouth, I cut engines, inflated the life raft, and filled it with 2 weight belts, my borrowed BCD, and the empty attractant vial sealed in a dive sock. I scuttled it with a dive knife, watching as it took water and folded like wilted petals. One last splash, and the raft slipped beneath waves destined to scatter, debris miles apart. Motoring into Slip 12 at dusk, I spotted no harbor master. Tour boats were still unloading. I tied a sloppy cleat hitch, wiped prints from the rail with a chamois Baxter had left on board, then shouldered my dry clothes bag and walked off the pier with the nonchalance of a man who'd failed his ear test and cut the dive short. The security camera above the fuel dock panned lazily right as I strode left. In the Jeep, my hands began to shake. I clenched the steering wheel until tendons ached. Reflection checkpoint. Adrenaline is mercifully mute in the moment, but it invoices its fee afterward. Tremors, nausea, a metallic film on the tongue. Have you ever taken decisive action only to discover your body pays a higher price than your mind predicted? File that sensation. It's a teacher that never softens the lesson. I drove south, detouring onto a gravel pull-off overlooking the sea. Night was rinsing color from sky to slate. Somewhere out there, sharks cruised with bellies full. I expected guilt, but felt only distance, as though I'd audited an account and balanced its ledger. The closest emotion was relief. Relief that the retreat would have no mentor, that Helena might return from shift to discover the self-help ladder she'd been climbing had vanished. Yet fairness, Gerald's foggy currency, still lingered. What about Kara? What about other students who'd believed Baxter's gospel? Removing him wouldn't erase their scars. Maybe fairness was a myth after all, a horizon that recedes as you sail. I pressed forehead to steering wheel and whispered a confession to whatever night spirit governs the sea. I'm not the hero, but neither is he. Let the ocean decide. Back at the condo, I scrubbed myself raw in scalding water, rinsed hair twice. I laundered clothes on high heat, sealed them in a trash bag, and buried it at the bottom of the complex dumpster beneath pizza boxes. By the time Helena texted, "Heading to the villa, love you," I'd staged 2 dive selfies against a stock reef shot and posted them to a private hobby forum, time-stamped by EXIF. Alibi seeds watered and ready. Then I sat on the lanai watching constellations dial up brightness. I expected elation. Instead, I felt hollow, like a building whose tenants had moved out overnight. If you remove the cornerstone of your rage, what props up the rest of your identity? That's today's reflection question. I don't have the answer yet. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. I let it ring to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text pinged, a screenshot of a Coast Guard bulletin, unmanned vessel adrift south of Quincy Bay. Search in progress. My stomach dropped, not from fear of discovery, but because the reality of death always ripples wider than the splash. Helicopter blades would soon chop the sky, divers would grid search, families would be called. Helena would learn her guru was missing on the eve of her graduation. Wind rattled the palm fronds like bones in a cup, shaking out possibilities I couldn't retrieve. I poured a finger of single malt and raised it to the black expanse beyond the railing. "To fair seas," I murmured, though the toast tasted like salt and ash. And somewhere below, the reef kept its silent vigil, as impartial as any judge, as final as any jury. The knock that rattled the condo door at dawn wasn't urgent so much as uncertain, like the visitor hadn't decided whether to pound or retreat. I pulled on a t-shirt that still smelled faintly of bleach and opened up to face a Coast Guard officer from Search and Rescue. Behind her, a second uniformed man lingered near the stairwell, jotting into a notebook. The officer introduced herself, Lieutenant Maya Torres, and asked if I knew a Baxter Reynolds. I blinked sleep from my eyes, letting a half-second of confusion bloom before I answered. "Sure, he's my wife's dive instructor. Why?" "His vessel was recovered last night without him aboard," she said, gaze skimming the hallway behind me. "We're canvassing anyone who might have seen or spoken with him yesterday." I rubbed the back of my neck the way half-awake people do on television crime shows. "I actually dove with him mid-afternoon. Ear started acting up again, so I surfaced early. He stayed down to photograph coral. We split afterward. I figured he had another client." Lieutenant Torres lifted a brow. "You left him on site." "He waved me off," I said. "Pretty routine. Baxter pits self-reliance against dependency, that's his brand." I shrugged for effect. She wrote the phrase word for word. "We'll need a formal statement and your dive computer log. Can you swing by station headquarters today?" "Of course, anything to help," I replied, savoring how clean the lie felt rolling off my tongue. A terrible sign, I know. When deception no longer scrapes the conscience, it means you've already canceled the lease on innocence. If you've ever crossed that line, what woke you up afterward? Or did you stay asleep? The officers left. I filled the electric kettle, listening to its growl climb toward steam, then poured boiling water over grounds I'd ground too fine, bitterness whispering that fare was a myth I'd murdered in cold water. Helena texted from Baxter's villa before lunch. "Coast Guard here. He's missing. I'm scared. Please answer." I let the bubbles on screen rise and fade 3 times before I typed back a safe blend of concern and confusion. My indifference wasn't a performance. It was a kind of shock cocoon, the brain's merciful pause button after catastrophe you yourself engineered. By dusk, local news anchors stood on the pier framed by flashing patrol lights, repeating the same platitudes. "Experienced diver, sudden squall maybe, search ongoing." I muted the TV, focusing on tone, not content. Reporters sounded almost wistful, as if they treasured the drama's half-empty bottle and feared the next sip would drain it. When Helena finally drove up, her high beams swept the courtyard palms into skeletons. She rushed inside, still wearing hospital scrubs. The retreat bag dangled from her shoulder like a prop in a play that had closed before opening night. "Bran, they think Bax is dead." Her voice cracked on the last word, more astonishment than grief. "I can't process." I handed her tea, hands steady. "Sit, tell me everything they said." She sank into the sofa and spilled half the cup down her thigh. Minimal burns, nurse's reflex, she didn't flinch. The investigators had asked the same questions: last contact, medical conditions, enemies. She described Baxter's expansion practice, careful not to spotlight herself as a disciple. "I feel guilty," she whispered, eyes glossing. "I promised I'd be at the villa by 7, but an ER code blue ran late. If I'd arrived on time, maybe." "Maybe you'd be missing too," I interrupted, gently stroking her hair. Guilt, the lever that moved her more than desire or duty. Baxter had known it, manipulated it. Now I wielded it, immediately ashamed of how natural it felt. There's a lesson here. Any tool you pick up to defend yourself can cut others, sometimes before you know you've swung. She curled against me and sobbed, loud, wet, room-filling sobs. I kept stroking, measuring which tears fell for Baxter, which for herself, and which, if any, fell for the fracture in our marriage. Even as she wept, her phone buzzed, Kara's number. Helena silenced it without looking. The next 3 days unfurled like gauze. Dive crews grid-searched, helicopters thudded over the bay, rumor currents shifted each hour. Some said a sudden riptide caught Baxter. Others spoke of a prop strike or nitrogen narcosis. Clarence cornered me at the pool to murmur, "Predators often drown in their own reflections," then waddled off to refill his sangria. Oddly comforting. Helena oscillated between frantic sleeplessness and catatonic naps, drifting through rooms like someone who'd forgotten why she entered them. She asked to hold me, then pushed me away, muttered about guilt, about cosmic signs, about the thin membrane between transformation and destruction. Baxter's language clung to her like sea salt you can't rinse off no matter how hot the shower. Each night, police updated me on the search, verifying my statement against GPS logs. My dive computer showed a controlled ascent aborted at 22 minutes, exactly as I'd said. They noted some minor anomalies, but nothing contradicted the official story that Baxter kept diving alone. Helena had no reason to doubt my version. She'd been miles away. The alibi held. By midweek, the Coast Guard downgraded operations to recovery mode. At the condo, Helena stared blankly at her untouched dinner. I slid the plate into the fridge and sat across from her. The moment felt heavy enough to bend the table legs. "Hell," I began, voice low. "I booked us therapy with a counselor in Hilo. Not Baxter's style. Real boundaries, real licenses." She blinked as if the term real stung. "Do you still want this?" Her hand gestured at the space between us, a fractured ceramic only she could see. "I want honesty," I said, "and I want a safe." She nodded slowly, and for the first time since the disappearance, her gaze held mine long enough to crack the numb glaze over her pupils. She didn't confess, and I didn't demand. Some truths rot when exposed, seeping toxins through every other memory. I'd already handled the rot. Now I needed to decide whether the foundation could still bear weight. That night she crawled into bed and clung to my arm like a castaway. Her breathing eventually steadied into sleep, but mine never did. I stared at the ceiling fan blade slicing darkness into anonymous hours. The question looping my skull wasn't whether I'd done wrong. Of course I had. It was whether the person I'd become in the process deserved any future with the woman lying inches away. Come morning, Helena called in sick and drove to meet the Hilo therapist alone. I didn't ask what surfaced in session. Respecting privacy is easy when you already know the secret answers. Instead, I walked the harbor, nodding at fishermen and listening to gulls that didn't yet know their scavenging routes had one less charter boat to follow. On a wharf bench, I found Skinny waxing his longboard. He looked up, eyes flinty. "Heard they're calling it an accident." "Looks that way," I said. Skinny watched my face as if searching for the tide chart of guilt. "World's quieter without him," he muttered. Then he paddled out to chase a shoulder-high swell that peeled like an opening page. Helena returned at dusk with sea-glass eyes and a raw whisper. "My dad leaving messed me up more than I admitted." Baxter knew exactly where to press. I set aside my laptop. Therapy unspools old knots, but we decide what threads to keep. Let's pick carefully together. She crawled onto the couch, head in my lap, and cried again, different tears this time. Not for Baxter, not even for guilt, but for who she'd almost become. I stroked her scalp, each motion erasing a millimeter of the distance between us. I didn't yet know if forgiveness would grow in that space, but for the first time I felt fertile ground instead of ash. 3 months slipped by, quiet as low tide. Officially, Baxter was declared lost at sea. Kara settled estate matters and fled back to LA, leaving the villa shuttered and empty. Condo gossip died down once a real estate flip and a mid-season hurricane stole the rumor spotlight. Helena and I attended counseling every week. She confronted neediness, I confronted control. We practiced reflective listening, therapist jargon that mostly means you shut up long enough to hear the texture beneath words. One session, she admitted that Baxter had suggested experiential intimacy exercises. She swore nothing had happened physically, though her voice quivered on nothing. I nodded, choosing not to press. Whether or not she'd crossed a line, the path was the same. Keep walking forward or plant explosives under us both. On a breezy October morning, she joined me snorkeling behind the condo's breakwater. Baby turtles flapped through sun-struck water columns. She surfaced giggling and spit salt from her lips. "My breathing cadence still rocks." I laughed for real, the first laugh unweighted by irony in months. Later, she suggested auctioning her scuba gear to fund a trip back to Washington to see her mom. A tether rediscovered. Evenings, we grilled fish and debriefed small triumphs. Her first solo central line insertion, my profitable hedge on Brazilian coffee futures. We learned again to celebrate without measuring whose victory mattered more, a delicate rebar threaded through cracked concrete. But the human psyche never grants unconditional pardons. Some nights I jerk awake, tasting diesel and chum on the back of my tongue, hearing the thud of a shark against aluminum hull. On those nights I slip outside, sit under the moon, and practice the same breathing cadence Helena now swears saved her life. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. The ocean hushes, indifferent but steady. Eventually, I confessed pieces of my past rage to Helena, bar fights, court-mandated anger management, omitting only the newest, darkest chapter. The omission lodged like a splinter, but outing it would shatter everything we'd glued back together. Every relationship balances a ledger of truth and mercy. Subtract too much mercy and the numbers never reconcile. Subtract too much truth and the ledger catches fire. Where's your ratio? I still don't know mine. December arrived, island air cooling to something locals call sweater weather, even though you'd still break a sweat hauling groceries. We walked the promenade to watch migrants erect bonfires for the solstice, flames hissing in onshore breeze. Helena squeezed my hand. Do you ever feel we're living on borrowed time? All time is borrowed, I said, sparing her the arithmetic of exactly whose debt remained unpaid. I asked if she wanted to renew our condo lease another year. She nodded slowly. Paradise feels different now, she added. Sharper, but realer. Maybe that's the moral we each settled on. Beauty is sharper when you've nicked yourself on its edges. Keep an eye on the blade, honor what it can carve, and never assume the handle won't slip. If you've stuck with me to this point, I want to ask, what would forgiveness look like in your story? Does it demand confession, or is changed behavior enough? Drop a thought below. Someone scrolling the comments at 3 a.m. might need your insight more than you know. As for Helena and me, we keep waking to the same turquoise horizon, mindful that every tide pulls secrets back toward shore. Some mornings we find nothing but shells. Other mornings a rusted hook gleams in the sand, warning that yesterday's bait hasn't finished working. We pocket the hook, breathe salty air, and walk on. Because the only way to honor a second chance is to keep choosing it, wave after wave, truth after half-truth, until the sea decides we're even.